Now, was it the jelly beans that really, hang on, and when did you decide to step it up and make a name for yourself? All right, so was that the jelly beans that really helped make a name for you, or?
Yeah, look, I'm not really sure. At that stage in time, I was just so concentrated on doing something that I actually love doing. I threw down more money on a gecko than I'd ever kind of thrown down on a project in my life. I think it was about 5 and 6 grand respectively for two geckos, and then plus working through those. So I was really just in my own world doing what I do. So for me, it was just keep doing it, keep posting photos because I like to share what I'm doing with everybody. And I don't even think that I'd made a name for myself or realised that I'd made a name for myself until, people had started reaching out going, geckos are amazing. And, I've been following you on Facebook and following you on Aussie Pythons back in the day. I was filling their lizard threads up 3 or 4 times a day. So, no, in all honesty, I don't think I recognised that I'd made it, so to speak. It was really just a case of focusing on the projects, doing my thing, and sharing the love with the photos.
Well, you certainly grabbed everyone's attention with those jelly beans because Queensland's very quiet for geckos. You don't see many geckos up here, and then all of a sudden those jelly beans were just frigging everywhere. So yeah, you definitely made a splash with them. Where? Now, what did you move on to? Oh, hang on a tick, man. Hang on. I want to try. I almost forgot. Only Kupper can talk at the moment. Alright, hang on, guys. How do I. Hey, Dane. Yes. I want to get these photos up again. So, where am I? Aha! There we go. There are the jelly beans. Here come the new toys, people. So for those that have never seen the jelly beans, that's what we're talking about. Those cute little critters there. And now so I just brought up photo one, man. I don't think you can see it, but I've just brought up photo one of those 3 little jelly beans, all in that blue tub.
Yep.
What did
that was pretty much 3 of about 50 odd that I'd produced that year out of the first lot of hets that I'd produced. So it was absolutely crazy. But
now I got photo 2. That's a little thing, little gecko coming out of the egg. What are we looking at here?
yeah, so that particular one was the first jelly bean to come out of what ended up being hets. Early days when they were handed to me, no one could really tell me the mode of inheritance, which was really odd because they'd been through 2 hands at that stage. So, I'd waited the 60 odd days for these things to hatch, and not only one but both of those in that clutch were patternless. I think at that stage I had the patternless male over a het, and I was just expecting normal looking geckos to keep and hold back. And when that popped out, I think it was about 11 o'clock at night. And I think I called half the planet.
Oh, all right. Good stuff. Now, after what do we got? Next photo. Now, this caging, this racking system that we're looking up. Yep. I just brought up the 3rd photo. Is that the racking system that you bred the geckos in?
Yeah, look, Adam Elliott at the time was rolling with his Aussie Racks product, and Adam, I probably owe Adam a bit of a shout out here because, at age 20 or 21, somewhere around there, I absolutely drained that guy's life, and he took me under his wing and gave me the lay of the land and gave me some few truths about reptiles and corrected me whenever I spoke out of turn. But he was also very, very helpful putting together my room for me. I'd say, Adam, I've just had another 30 geckos hatch. He's like, all right, I'll go build you another rack. So we had pretty much the whole back room of my house decked out with geckos with those tubs. So singularly housed, every single tub had some sort of project. I was OCD then, still OCD now, and everything was labelled. I knew exactly where everything was, and you can just see it got to a point where I couldn't even walk in that room.
I know what your ACD's like. It's next level.
Yeah.
Hey, before we move into the next question, Wayne, can I have a sound check from you, mate?
Yo.
Yo.
Yeah.
Yep, right. We're all good. I just got Dane working on stuff in the background here. So, poor bloke's working his ass off.
Old Dane, the IT bloke.
Yeah, hey, yeah. Yeah, he's not having a fun night, man. Alright, so I am loving these new toys. Alright, so what are these? I've just brought up the fourth photo. What now? It's another little, some sort of little lizard monitor. What am I looking at?
It's actually a lizard. So I guess the transition for me was I'd got all the projects. I had hypos, I had pilbarensis in all different shades, reduced patterns, all sorts of stuff. So for me, I think I waited nearly 3 years to get my hands on an albino. Now, albinos at that stage were an overseas commodity. I'd heard whispers that the albino geckos were sort of floating around, and it really got to a point where, you know yourself, once you start to get a bit bored with the projects you've got, nothing new is coming to the table, you kind of start to think, well, okay, I've got these geckos sitting here. I've got an opportunity to maybe play with something different, and I've got very limited space. So I started to sell off bits and pieces of the projects, the patentless. I'd always kept what I could produce, and I knew I could produce 300 plus geckos in a year with what I had there. So dropped off half a dozen of the projects and naturally transitioned into dragons. I'd had that bit of dragon for years, and I've always been one to sort of go for those niche type animals, and jumped into some of the small dragons. I'd actually moved through a stage. I forgot about this stage. I actually moved through a stage of buying green tree pythons, and
I remember that,
on the tail end of that. Yeah, and that lasted pretty. I think it lasted for about 6 to 8 months, because that was the first taste of reminding myself that I'm not a snake person. As hard as I try, I go for the top end stuff. I buy it, keep it, and I keep it well, and then I get so bored because snakes are just not my thing. So,
in saying that, you kick butt at the Albino Spotted project. So I've just brought up an Albino Spotted python, the start of those photos. Now, you kicked butt with them when you pushed into that project.
Yeah, look, again, I said to myself at the tail end of dragons, I think I just separated from my previous partner at the time, and I needed to sell up a couple of the animals to potentially sell up their house and move on, but ended up keeping the house, and said to myself, I've got all this money here, what am I going to do? So at that time, the Albino Spotted project was about, I think, 10 to 12K for a visual, and they were the size of a shoestring.
Yeah.
And, in true Kupper style, I pushed in hard with that project. I burnt more cash, and I actually said to myself at the time, and made a pretty big post about it too, that from a centimeterage, or even if that's a word, but from a centimeter point of view per animal, like size per cash dollar, it was just insane the amount that I just paid for this. So Mum, I remember I passed it to Mum, because I like to try and share some of the passion with Mum, and she's like, hang on, you just paid $5 or $6 grand for these geckos. And I'm like, yeah, Mum, but I kind of made that back a little, then that and then some. And then I showed her the next project, and she was like, what the hell's that? And I'm like, it's a snake. She's like, it's like 10 centimeters long. I'm like, yeah. She goes, how much did you pay for that? And I'm like, 11.5 grand. And she's like, I don't know what I'm going to do with you. It's worse than a drug habit.
It is more expensive than a drug habit.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit more productive. But luckily enough, with Antaresia, I got that particular one from Snake Ranch, and I was a little bit dubious at the time, because Snake Ranch had kind of got a little bit of a bad name for sending out non-feeding snakes, or Antaresia that had, been 5 years old or something, right. and they were still the size of a shoestring. So I was a little bit dubious taking that on, but bought that, had some supplementary possible hets. I was lucky enough to get 100% het female off Damien Hyde and TJ
Yeah.
Rest in peace, buddy. And yeah, was lucky enough just to be able to power that albino, as you do with snakes, to a decent size to be able to breed. Given the fact that I hadn't really bred snakes at that point, I was again a bit dubious about my own ability, and I was still a little bit worried that I'd get sort of halfway through cooling and go, do you know what, snakes are not my thing. I'm going to go buy some lizards. But sure enough, I'd stuck to my guns and cooled them in line with the recommendation, and lo and behold, went through the process and kid on Christmas, and everything was locking up well. And the only problem was that I got halfway through, the whole ovulation process and them upside down, and realised that I had to get on a plane to Vanuatu for 4 weeks, just around the time that they were supposed to lay. So I'm not sure if Jay Trundle's still online, but I owe that guy more than a few drinks, because he stayed at my house the whole time I was in Vanuatu, and pretty much reported back to me on the daily. Now, I was on a cruise ship with very limited Wi-Fi, jumping from island to island, and it was a solid 3 or 4 days between me jumping on the ship expecting a clutch at any given point and actually getting some sort of Wi-Fi signal to be able to speak to Jay. So I pretty much got to Noumea, I think it was, which is one of the islands that you sort of jump backwards and forwards to within that island stretch, and I was pretty much shaking. I was pretty much shaking down every single local to see if they spoke English, to try and be a bit of a Wi-Fi whore. And I ended up getting some Wi-Fi. The first thing I got was the next photo, which I've already sent you, which is my favourite female on eggs. And same situation. That night I painted Vanuatu or Noumea red. I went to every single bar and I was like, I bred some snakes.
There we are. So I've skipped and we got all 3 of us plus a photo. So there you go. There's I got the male. Hang on. So there's a male with one of the females, and the female on eggs. That's up now. So that's one of your favourite photos, yeah?
Yep. It is definitely one of my favourite photos. It was well positioned. Again, I say thanks to Jay Trundle for taking a decent photo. But yeah, that particular photo pretty much ejected about, I'd say, $2,000 into the New Caledonia's island economy that night. So,
Job, he just spotted the raptor behind you.
Yeah, that's got a bit of story behind it. I can't breed raptors. I know recent the size of chickens, so probably less of an effect now. But I'm absolutely obsessed with velociraptors.
I see where you come from. I've just picked up some new monitors and I am absolutely obsessed with them. I look at them and think, velociraptor. I was heading over to Wayne's place. He rang me up and said, we got a little lace monitor hatching out. And I'm thinking that scene in Jurassic Park, little velociraptors coming out and shit. Love them. You mentioned, who was it? Adam Elliott before. Now he's a really good photographer as well, isn't he, by memory?
Yeah, depending on the day. He's actually a really good photographer among many of his talents. But don't tell Scott Iper though, because I think we've got a little bit of a running competition on that one. But some of the things he does with photography are absolutely insane. If you've ever been on a herping trip with a guy, you want to throttle him the whole time, because it's like, Adam, we've been here for 3 hours photographing a garden skink, and he's like, no, I'm not leaving here until I get it smiling. And I'm like, damn it, gotta go, mate. But yeah, no, he does some absolutely wonderful stuff. He's out at Ballarat Wildlife Park now, doing his thing and keeping the reptile house up to scratch.
Alrighty, so next photo is result of, now I can see a little albino hatchling. Now the hatchling beside that, is that a little blonde or is that a het for albino?
No, well, because I had 8 females that I threw that albino across, I had a fair bit to choose from when the hets come out. So a lot of those were possible hets. I was lucky enough to get it, but early days with that project, and it may still actually be a problem now. There was quite a few with kinks. So because it was early doors and I had one of the original 100% het females that wasn't really that far removed genetically, ended up with quite a few with kinks, which was a bit unnerving, but we were still lucky to get 2 albinos that were pretty solid, and quite a few hets because we'd thrown them across a lot of the possible hets that come from Snake Ranch. Now, I think the common theme was that a lot of those possible hets that come out of Snake Ranch weren't actually the genetic material they come from. But at the time, I took the gamble, as you do with possible hets, and I was still very, very lucky to pump out quite a considerable number of those, decent quid. That particular one was probably my favourite out of the lot. It retained a fair bit of colour. It was relatively reduced patterned. Smash food pretty much straight out of, didn't even have its first shed yet, and it was smashing food. But yeah, they went from everywhere from a dark chocolate colour with not really too much patterning to really profound patterning, as you see there.
The other one, it looks like a little blonde. It's absolutely stunning. Now, I remember buying a pair of hets, again, same time you did, when they first come out at 7,000 a pair. And yeah, my hets, they were just dark, ugly looking things. They just weren't pretty spotted pythons at all, very dark animals.
No.
And I remember Rodney, the very first ever albino spotted that started the whole thing. I remember he had 4 kinks by memory. And over time, they just sort of straightened out. They'll tell you they got physio done and all that sort of stuff, but as far as I know, I think they just fed him up and they kinks just straightened out a bit with time and the way they went and used him. So I got up. Yeah.
The kinks that come out with this project were the animal stayed in the eggs for 3 or 4 days after pipping, and it's just like, I'm going to investigate this because these things should have come out by now, and gave the egg a good slice open, and sure enough, these things were pretzel reincarnate. They weren't slight kinks. They were, I'm surprised, just still alive and actually looking at me right now. So look, I let them come out of the I removed them from the egg because they'd obviously well and truly absorbed the yolk by that stage, but nature took its course, and I think I had to euthanize one, my own morality.
Luke Skywalker left a message in the comments saying that as far as he knows, the project's doing well now, and a lot of that problem's been taken out. And I think Peter Birch has been getting good results as well out of the albinos.
That's good.
So so I think they're doing well. Deb, everyone is asking you to get in there. So as far as I know, Deb's just off to the side of Wayne. I don't know if she's still there or not. Is Deb still beside you, Wayne, or is she break off?
No, she's not.
She break off. I seen a little bit of her arm in there before.
The elusive Deb.
She hasn't been here for a while.
Now, someone asked if we can ask you some questions, Wayne. We'll finish off this interview with Kupper, and then we can go free for all sort of thing. Now I'm pushing through onto. All right, now I'm looking at a totally new setup. What are these enclosures that I'm looking at? It's just a full wall of new enclosures there, man.
What you can't see is Tim Mensford from iPad the couch stabbing me with a machete, but no, these particular enclosures were. I think for over the years, the one thing that I've been known for is the old balls and all philosophy when it comes to setting things up. I don't do things in halves because I like to call myself a lazy keeper. I don't like to leave anything to chance. So having the perfect setup rather than having the 10% that I need to follow up every day is pretty much what I like to run for. These particular enclosures are something that's been in the Australian market for quite some time, but you see them sort of come in and out of popularity. From my understanding, they're the only Australian-made plastic or PVC enclosure. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tim. Apologies if I got the material wrong, but these particular enclosures, they're made here by the team at iPets. They come in a bit of an odd size, so you either get a 2 foot, a 3 foot, or a just over 6 foot from memory. And the beauty of these things, they're disinfectable. They please my OCD, which is probably the most important part. And when I bought Blue Tongues, I sort of navigated myself after 4 or 5 years of not keeping a reptile project post the Antaresia. I really focused on bird mutations through that time. And when I come out of it, I reached out to Joe Ball. Who else would you reach out to for Blue Tongues, right? And I said to
Roger Kramer.
I said to Joey,
he's another good one. Can't forget him.
Now. I reached out to Joe. I only really want some pets, and I think the undertone of conversation was, yeah, right, you want pets, but I still grabbed a couple, and I started playing with those. And I'd been after Joe for years. I'd said to Joe, I think it's about time I start playing in your field. And he's like, yeah, whenever you're ready, reach out. And the minute I was ready, I just said, Joe, I want that, and send it. So that pretty much spawned this.
Like that.
I think I've been around for probably as long as what Joe was doing Blue Tongues. I was playing with geckos at the time, and I regrettably probably gave up something that would have landed me in the same position where Joe's at these days, which is the forefront of a particular species. But I think Joe and I have been talking since back then, and I've been following Joe's projects and have ultimate respect for what he does. And when this, honestly, hand on heart, thought that those Blue Tongues were just going to be half a dozen decent visual projects, and I wasn't going to go too hard because I'd sort of burnt myself out with the last project. And below and behold, I started off with 3 or 4 enclosures and 3 Blue Tongues, and ended up with 6 to 10 shortly after. And I just moved house too, so for me, I'd spent maybe 3 or 4 months growing those things up. Got to sort of winter, we moved house, and then on the tail end of that, that's I think when I come up to Queensland and took you out to Joe's. I said to myself, no, I'm not going to breed. I don't want to breed. And Joe showed me around a couple of his lizards and stuff, and it just rekindled something. Visual animals, genetics. It's a lizard. Nah, I'm gonna pair them. I'm gonna pair them.
All right, so we got.
And as a result.
Yeah. As a result, what? Sorry.
As a result, these cages just went leaps and bounds. I scoured the internet to try and find as many as I could. I'll thank Tim again for connecting me with a retail outlet that was able to order these in en masse for us. I got the best of the best lighting thrown into the mix as well, which is the Arcadia daisy chained high output T5s and the deep heat projectors that you could get to heat them. And yeah, the rest is history. I think I've spent a small room put together. We're moved out relatively rural and it's freezing here. I think I fluked it with the first winter, but the second winter hit us pretty hard, and my result kind of suffered this year as not a result of having this room sort of just a tin shed more than anything. So that's pretty much the end product now, and I'm looking at it now and I'm already thinking that it's probably going to double again, which is typical.
Yeah, but that's it, all lit up behind you, yeah? So we've got them off to the right-hand screen so that people can see them all, the photo all blown up, all looking good. But that's him, all lit up behind you. And we got Scott Iper telling you that the one in the middle is a little bit off. It's a little bit off centre. And Joe Ball saying that, you definitely should have kept him for sure. So... Yeah.
We'll go into a bit of information later on that's kind of, when we talk about the regrets and what you should have done in the past. I think some patience when...
Hindsight, eh?
Hindsight and patience. But it is what it is, yeah.
Now, did we cover why you got out of the geckos? You were, what was it? You were moving house out, getting out of a relationship.
No, no,
Something
no,
like
no.
that, or?
That was pretty much the Antaresia. But with the geckos, the time, back then, a little known fact about me is I'm low registering Asperger's. So for me, it's I get pretty antsy pretty quickly.
Which
If
I love
something's
about you, man.
I get pretty antsy when the hands are idle. So I think I'd reach the ceiling of all my projects. The beauty of being at the forefront of any particular project is that you get calls thick and fast when something weird or wonderful pops up. Those calls had started to dry up a bit. I didn't really have too many more projects to play with. I sat on them for a couple of years, and the albino was out of grasp. There was a few bits and pieces sort of coming in, and the legalities of having an albino were kind of shone across me from the local department. If an albino popped up in your collection, you were definitely going to get the rappos with. They were very aware where those types of things were coming from.
Politics.
And I just made pretty much the red tape, and I gave up because I'd lost the passion, to be honest. The parks, because I had a relatively large collection, were just by way of the Victorian law were popping in because I had quite a number of animals. Unfortunately, the Asian clientele really took a liking to geckos at the time. We're talking like early to mid 2000s. And yeah, it just got too much for me. Young punter, bit antsy. Probably should have been a bit more patient and waited it out, because I think it wasn't too long before then that, not too long after then, that the albino kind of popped on the scene, and I would have been very well positioned to push that albino project into hypos, pushed it into pilb stock that was from everywhere, reduced pattern stripes. Realistically, back then, crossbreeding geckos was a big no-no, but now that seems to have gone by the wayside. Could have put it into the JellyBeans to be a patternless. So yeah, that's
plenty of projects.
It is what it is.
And now we got Tim Mansfield saying should have, could have, would have. So where is that JellyBean project now? Do you know? Are people doing those crosses? They doing the albino cross JellyBeans and yada yada yada.
Look, I think there's a couple of people out there doing it. Mid last year, I helped a young bloke out who was struggling with a few internal issues, and took on his gecko stock and tried to rekindle my own personal love for it. And he had some patternless there, and in all honesty, I looked at them and said, this is a far cry to what I was actually working with. The strength and the vigor wasn't there, and
really,
the big heart-shaped tails. Yeah, the big heart-shaped tails that I was known for. And look, I don't know whether it was stock or where he got it from, but it really seems that a lot of the projects, and I'll generalise, but I don't mean to generalise, because I know there are a couple of people out there doing the good work with them still. I really think that the crossbreeding took precedence to try and get the mutations out, and with a lack of genetic material coming in from wild caught on permit animals, they seem to have declined a little bit. They're definitely not as strong as some of the stuff that I was working on back in the day, I should say.
Yep.
But
makes you sound old, doesn't it?
It does. I was reflecting on some of the questions you shot through to me, and I've just gone, nah, I'm not that old. And then I've got to remind myself, I'm 35 this year, and I've been dabbling in this sort of stuff since I was 12. So, I am old.
So now your focus is on blue tongues, and you're using that setup for blue tongues, yes? And how are you finding it? How are the blue tongues finding it? How's it all working out?
Yeah, look, I'm a bit of a lazy keeper, so the old I had the choice of either keeping them in rack or putting them in closures, and given the first thought was that I only really wanted pets, I said to myself, hey, I'm going to put them in enclosures.
Yeah, see, I like seeing the animal,
Yeah. So I'm very much the same. I didn't spend $5,000 on a blue tongue to whack it in a rack that I only pull out once a day, But look, I'm absolutely loving this setup. During last winter, it kind of caught me off guard not having the insulation and the plaster up. So things got a little bit cool, but the beauty of these enclosures is they're not like melamine, which are heat sinks. You know, the heat spots are pretty much bang on. As long as I can keep the ambience up in the room, the Arcadia stuff is doing its job. They've got access to UV. So look, I'm absolutely loving it. Not just that, it looks absolutely brilliant. You know, those enclosures being modular, I've gone that one step extra and made up a steel rack. So I'm absolutely loving it. Yeah, like honestly, I walk in here every day and I just smile.
Now, out of the blue, Arcadia. Does anyone know what's happening with Arcadia?
That's actually a good question. And look, I probably have a bit of insider knowledge that I can't share with you just yet, unless someone wants to pop up and mention something in the comments. But watch that space.
There's only 85, 90 odd people watching. We can all keep it a secret, man.
No, look, I think
if you can let us,
it's got itself a cult following.
All right.
It got itself a cult following when it re-emerged. The products are great. You know, I'm absolutely loving that I've implemented. I'm a bit of a product reviewer / like to buy everything I possibly can to play around with a project before I put it all together. And you know, I went a bit blindly into grabbing the products, and you know, I haven't looked back. I've absolutely loved them. So, you know, all I can say is that brand will go strength to strength with the Australian hobby, especially when people like myself. I think Coops Reptiles has picked up a fair bit. Mitchell Hodgson has. He's a bit of a lizard geek. Sorry, mate. Don't mean to call you a geek. But you know, he's a lot of the products as well, along with quite a few others. You know, Dean from WA, who does a lot. I think he's got quite a few of the products. I'm absolutely loving them too. So, you know, whilst the products are doing the job and hitting the mark, I don't think any of us are going to put them down. You know, price is a little bit up there, but when you start paying for some of those premium products that last and do everything they're supposed to do, they definitely outshine having to go through the cyclic nature of buying 3, 4, or 5 of the cheaper products before you get the desired result. So,
Joanne Payne just made the comment saying that they're hard to get hold of at the moment, and I don't know if she knows. I don't know if people are aware, but I think it was about 4 or 5 weeks ago. Anthony got into a bit of a bad car accident. The car blew up or something, and he's in hospital with like burns to 3/4 of his body or something like that. The rumour goes.
Yeah.
So I'm not. That's why I asked the question. What is happening with Arcadia? Does anyone know? Because I think he's in hospital for a while. Go, man.
Yeah, like I said, I've got a bit of insider information which I can't really share it just yet, but I'm sure it'll come to light. For those that do follow the Arcadia brand, you know, whether it's Anthony or whether it's a new distributor, I think that's definitely going to be supported in the future, because I think the owners of Arcadia have identified our market as being one that loves its products. You know, there's two ways to look at it. You know, we also love our cheap products, but you know, a good product will always hold its value in the market.
All right, let's move on to blue tongues. So we'll finish this interview up with the blue tongues and a few other just general questions. So blueies are what you're working on now. I've just brought up the first blue tongue.
Yeah.
And that's an albino blue tongue, is it? Is that your first albino?
Got it. Has it got its tongue up? Because I
tongue's
really
out.
got the live stream going.
Yep, tongue's out.
Yep. So that particular one's my holy grail at the moment. So we got to the end of the season, and you know, as you get with most seasons, you reinvest based on what cash you've got lying around. So because one live baby come out this season. Let's not talk about that. We won't dwell on it. But one live baby pop out for the season. I really didn't have a lot of spare cash to play around with. So this particular one is, a late season arrival. It's actually a visual T plus visual white northern that I bought to work with this year. So he's the absolute flagship of what I'm working with at the moment. He will work in with every single project that I've got here, and we've been an absolute champion with food. With luck, once we get on the tail end of cooling, he's going to be having a few lady suitors, that's for sure.
Oh, good for him. Good for him. Yeah. Next photo I got up. Looks like another albino.
Yep, that
It's a
particular
back
one
shot.
is.
It's a really good
Yep.
back shot.
That particular one is the one baby that I bred this year. So,
Right.
to give you an idea, these things grow, at pretty rapid rates to begin with. The old heat food scenario comes into play with these, and these things absolutely smash food. So, this particular one, because I only had one baby, I only defrosted food maybe once, and it was only really in small batches. So I'd always planned, given the fact that this particular baby was born in November, which was much earlier than some of the others that I punched out the year before, that I was going to slow feed it. I was just going to get in there when I could. I was pretty disheartened still from, the lack of result this year. And the bloody animal's bigger than its mother, bigger than its father, and it had basically grown to 500 grams by the time we hit late January, back off food, so that it wasn't going to be an absolute beefcake before winter.
Joey and Birch has just called it a little fatty.
Look,
Go.
it's absolutely smash food. It's the color on it's absolutely amazing. Like that shot there is under the UV lights, but it does not even come close to some of the colors that are coming through with that, and it's pretty much testament to or even just a flagship of what some of the Joe Ball, Kimberley Blue Tongues, Kimberley Cross, Eastern stuff has just been producing. It's absolute madness.
Agreed.
Last year when I bred, I can't even remember how many albinos I bred. How bad's that? I think it was about 11 or 12 albinos from last year. I did not want to give up any single one of those. And, I had my partner sort of giving me a very small jab going, sell a couple if you want, but keep them all if you really want to. And I'm like, I should probably sell some of the money back in. So, but, I shed a little bit of a tear every time one of those things shed, and even further tears when they went off to their new homes.
All right, before we move on to the next question, Wayne, Luke Skywalker, he wants to know if you're cold sitting there in your trademark tank top.
Cold.
Yeah, cold.
Look, I was going to say I'm going to go turn the heater on because it's bloody cold down here. I think we've just hit about 3 degrees, but this actually sits ready at about 15 degrees. So I will go and switch the heater on at some point, but I'm not just yet cold.
You cold, Wayne?
Red wine probably.
And same here in this room. It's nice and warm.
No, I feel the cold these days. I got my jacket on, so especially on dialysis days when I drop that 2 kilos, 3 kilos in an afternoon, it's jacket material. You feel it. Aircon's on. You're comfy now.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, well, the heat is on. Wait and see how quickly it heats up.
All right, man. Next photo. So I'm looking at, I think I'm looking at a pair of albinos side by side. Or is that an albino and a snow?
Yeah, look, that particular one's our T plus monster again, probably about let's call it a month, not even, probably about 3 weeks before the last photo. It just goes to show some of the contrast coming through. I really wanted to put it on something that was white as hell, so you could see the intricacies of a T plus versus the T plus white visual. And the one next to it is actually a snow, but it's really weird. It's the year before I made a white snow, which is a bit of an underlying hypo, which strips out all the yellow pigment. But this particular one, it's actually got some melanistic and white northern genetics in the background that I'll be working with this year. But it's pearlescent everywhere else, and it's got these yellow or orangey sidebars up it. So it's really hard to get a decent photo because it's almost like someone smashed a white snow into a normal snow, and it's just about. I absolutely love the animal. It's crazy, and again, it's something Joe Balls punched out for the year and looked after me with.
Good stuff. Alrighty, so next one. Now, what are these? These are white northerns, or I'm looking at a mum with 2 bubs.
No, these. Wash your mouth out.
Oh, I'm just learning this. We're learning as we go.
These particular ones are actually white snows.
Right.
So I remember I reached out to Joe because the two animals, or the originally bought were two aneries, probably the best, some of the best aneries Joe's ever produced, which were just void of every yellow pigment possible. And I bought myself a double het. And you know me, Troy, I don't sit on hets. You know, if I've got the cash there, it's show me a visual or nothing at all, you know. So later on down the track, I actually said to Joe, mate, I need something visual. What you got? Because I've got a white snow male here if you want it. And I'm like, yeah, just send it down. And we weren't really expecting him to breed that year, but he did the job. And you know, I think we got 30 days post the other two females that I thought were pregnant dropping their bundles, and I was absolutely ecstatic with that. You know, I'd bred a yellow snow, I'd bred half a dozen albinos, I got my hets out, I got a result. I was back in the groove of things, and we got towards the end of December, I think it was, and this particular albino did not look gravid to me. You know, I knew she was a bit chunky, but she'd gone and dropped me for a full litter of albinos, 4 of which were white snows. And I toted those things around on every single page that I could, because I was, you know, as with everything with blue tongues, they either look gravid or they don't. And then, you know, all of a sudden they pop out babies and you're like, well, I wasn't expecting that. So, you know, that particular one is, as I do, I kind of sit there for hours on end trying to photograph some of these animals in spots, and spend have ultimate patience to try and get them in the positions that I'm after. And that particular photo did the rounds on the reptile report too.
Congratulations.
So pretty stoked with that.
I love it when an Aussie hits reptile
look,
report.
I strangely enough, I'd never actually made it before I was on, but all of a sudden I had 3 or 4 consecutive photos racked up at reptile report. And, you know, it may not seem like much for some, but what we do is usually a thankless task. So getting a bit of notoriety based on, you know, the Yanks losing their marbles over something they can't have, it's definitely gives you a bit of a buzz and a bit of motivation to keep kicking on.
We've just lost visual. We've got, I don't know if you can see him, Wayne. I've lost visual this end, but I've got good audio.
I can still see him.
All right.
Yeah, I can see us.
All right. So we're pushing on. I've got 3 little albino hatchies in your hand. Is that right? Oh.
Yeah, definitely. Yep. Definitely. So those particular ones were the first litter to come out. So my favourite animal, my favourite female in the room is the anery that's got little head dots on it, like the Kimberley blue tongue. So she popped out, I think, about 11 babies, and she's essentially the room's sweetheart. So I walk in and she comes to the front of the cage and knows it's me and has a bit of a scratch, and we hand feed her and all that sort of jazz. So bit of a, you know, a special moment having her punch out a full litter, because she was the size of a balloon. Like, she was notably pregnant, but she punched out, I think, 4 or 5 albinos and the yellow snow, which is bang smack in the middle of those two. So that was the first litter that popped out. I remember I'd been at work all day, got back into the shed. I'd seen her in the morning before I'd left. Nothing. She didn't even look like she was giving birth. Come back, and she was like, just seeing those babies poking their head out of the hide. There was about 6 or 7 poking their head out of every crack, and I lifted it up, and sure enough, there's another photo kicking around on my page where it's her and the albino pretty much side by side, amazing. And I was able to take the photo, you know. So that again, that's one of the probably my favourite moments, being able to capture it. But they're a progeny about a week on.
Now I've been asked by Peter Birch to ask you about the vomit snow. Is there a bit of a story there with vomit snow? Is this an American story?
Yeah, it is an American story, which I was hoping to go through next week, but I will touch on it.
All right, you go nuts, man. I'm going to have a cigarette.
No, by all means. So when we kicked off, I'd spent the night in Sydney. So the night before we kicked off to go to the States, because all the flights were flying out of Sydney, and I'd been on let's just say an adventure the night before, and I drank my weight in alcohol, like I was a bit known for. And we got on a plane at 3 o'clock that afternoon, the following afternoon, and I was absolutely hungover. Like, I don't think I've ever been so hungover. So I thought to myself, you know, I'm going to get on this plane. It's going to be a long trip. I'll watch some movies. And I got on the plane and I was still feeling hungover as shit. So I'm like, nah, on the hair of the dog, and we did that, and I think we'd had half a dozen drinks, and I passed out and had some sleep. We got to LA. We went and seen Jay Brewer on the way through. Still bugger all sleep. I didn't really sleep on the plane that well. Then we flew from LA to Chicago, and we got off at Chicago, I think at about 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., something along those lines. And it was snowing. We'd gone from 35 degrees, I'm in shorts and a singlet, to it's minus 10 or something, and snow everywhere.
Oh, you idiot.
Froze my balls off. We got to the hotel, got settled, had bugger all sleep again, because when you're that jet lagged, it's kind of really hard to find sleep. But Peter had said to us, you've got to be up at 7 a.m. because we're going to go down to the Tinley Expo, and we've just got to get an early start. And I'm like, fuck, what have I signed myself into? So our travelling companion, James, and I'm sorry, buddy, if you're watching, I have to throw you under the bus, but James and I got up at 6:30. We went down with literally 2 or 3 hours sleep, went down to the bar downstairs, which is where they had their continental breakfast. And sure enough, in the States, like, their bars are open. Like, the minute you wake up, their bars are open. So I did the old, okay, James, let's get a drink. Birchie's just told us we're not leaving till 2 o'clock in the afternoon now, so we're up. Let's get a drink. Without James can't start with a cuppa. So we drank and we drank and we drank, and we got to the last drink, and I said, James, we're going to leave soon. I don't think we should drink anymore. And he's gone, no, let's get a Jaeger bomb. Let's get a Jaeger bomb. And I'm like, all right, are you sure? He's like, yeah, let's get a Jaeger bomb. Let's get a Jaeger bomb. And James got into the back of the car. We were hammered. Like, I've never, even me, I was like, shit, I don't understand how I'm standing right now. And we got in the back of the car, and let's just say James doesn't travel very well in the back seat of the car after he's been on a drinking session.
So was James throwing up everywhere in the snow?
Oh, I've got a photo of him in a compromising position, and let's just say he filled up quite a few takeaway cups with his
you're on babysitting duty?
Yeah, because Birchie would not let me down. It's like, Kupper, you've done this. You need to go watch him. And we actually got to the Tinley Expo, and I'll go through this a little bit later on when we kick off with that side of it. But we got to the Tinley Expo, and James was still passed out in the back seat. And Birchie looked at me and goes, mate, that's all you. And I'm like, fuck, what have I done? I took him to our hotel. We checked in, and I put him in the shower and got him into bed. And I come back downstairs to see what the guys are doing. And Birchie every hour is like, mate, you need to go and make sure he's alive. And I'm like, shit, I'm not good at this babysitting.
Wayne, just letting you know, Deb's getting stuck into the chocolate marshmallows, man. So,
Good on you.
Righty. Now, I had a question in there from Lee Ward. Are they the ones URS used to sell? Hard to see from my phone.
Yeah, URS and iPets are pretty much the same thing, guys. So,
right, there you go, Lee. So where are we up to with questions? Now, projects, hang on, I'm still going through photos. I got, what are these? Are these 4 snows I'm looking at?
Yeah, so these are full white snows that I produced probably about a month on. So I decided that I was going to keep everything, because that's what you do when you start producing, quite a number of visuals. But yeah, I just thought I'd put them together. I had, strangely enough, I had a fair bit of hate along the way, and I just thought I'd document it the whole way through. So, there was a certain people that shall not be named, as you like to put it, that were throwing shade at the legitimacy of me actually producing them. So I thought, along the way, I'd take as many photos as possible and throw them up. And every time I heard another whisper, I'd throw them up again,
so
just to rub
them in from someone else, or brought them in from overseas?
Anyone would think that you actually heard the story, Troy. Yeah, no, that they were saying that I'd actually bought them in or been sent them from another breeder for a photo opportunity. So to prove that their stock actually bred.
You got your marshmallows, Wayne. Yeah, it's all happening. Wayne's got his marshmallows. Chris is back. Velociraptor's still sitting there.
Red wine's still going.
Well done, sir. Well done. It's everyone seems to be. I see the convos you and the wife and Emma have with the red wine and isolation, and yous are nuts. Mob of drunks, a lot of yous.
No. But I think the tail end of that story is, there's, or I guess the thing to take from that story is there's quite a fair bit of hate within the hobby when you do a little bit better than somebody else. I think I've fallen in the trap when I've had, a bad season that I've just kind of been a bit hateful towards some people. But it's kind of getting a little bit worse. I think when you're at the top. I wouldn't say top end because I wouldn't say that I'm at the top end, but when you start producing some of the stuff that's, considered top end, you start to get a bit of hate from those that aren't really doing as well, which is a bit painful. But I've been around for quite some time, so you weather it pretty well.
And that's when you start to know that you're starting to make it. When they start talking shit about you, and that's you're starting to make it as a decent sort of a breeder.
I think with age, I've kind of realised that there's really no point in buying into it. So, if any of the younger keepers that are watching this, if you start to do what you do and you start to do it well, just make sure you turn the blinkers on, because those people come and go, and what you do and what you find important
and
won't
let
leave
the
you.
animals speak for themselves. Let your work
Correct.
speak for itself. Hang on a minute. Just trying to, and there we go. That's the end of the photos. Well, that worked pretty well. Photos, I hope everyone enjoyed that. We had some show and tell tonight with some photos. All right, then. Now that since you're down south, do you keep any of your blowies outside, or they all stay inside?
I definitely don't keep any of my blowies outside, but no. Look, the blueies here. I made the call before I moved here that I was going to start keeping things outside. Chris, don't do your usual thing and blow a heap of money on a massive setup. When I got here, I realised that realistically, my animals, unlike the northerners, can really only go outside for a couple of hours, a couple of months of the year, ideally. And when you've got a pregnant blue tongue outside and you live on a rural block pretty much, you don't know what's going to get into your cages. You can bulletproof them as much as you want, but I wasn't going to take that chance when you've got potentially $20,000 worth of babies in a blue tongue or in a couple of blue tongues, and you're leaving them outside in the sun, and what happens if a tree falls down, or what happens if the shed blows down, or what happens if a tornado hits? I just didn't want to play around with that. So in the end, I ended up keeping all of my stuff full-time inside. My babies, I keep them in vision racks. There's your plug vision. Send me some thanks. I keep my babies in vision racks, and in between feeding them, I'm actually keeping them under UV lights for the period of time it takes me to get to the fifth one. So they're under the UV between feedings, and if the day's fair enough, I'm whacking the animals, even if they're under natural UV, I'm whacking the animals outside for 3, 4, 5 hours. Or if I'm outside sitting there reading a book or on the laptop doing my day job, they're whacked outside in tubs with mesh lids. So, but realistically, full time, I just don't trust them. And it all comes down to control for me. And that's my OCD that kicks in. Control is being able to control your environment, control the enclosures, control temps, control safety, control single housing, for example, to control combating animals. To me, that's really, really important. So if I get some blotchies, I've been toying with the idea of getting some blotchies with all the photos that are popping up and all the mutations that, well, I shouldn't say all of them, but the couple of mutations that Joe's working with. I'm starting to get a bit tempted, but I'm in an area that we don't have blotchies naturally occurring. Well, I haven't seen any. We've got Easterns and we've got the Stumpies. They could potentially go outside without any drama, but again, all it takes is for me to be away for a couple of days interstate for work, or a bit forgetful because the young fella's taking up my time for a day, and something drastic could happen unless you've got a decent setup set up with pits. So, yeah, to me, I'd much rather cop the electricity or keep them inside.
I've got here from Scott Iper. Has anyone looked into important plastic that allows, or imported plastic that allows UV transmission? Has anyone looked into imported plastic that allows UV transmission?
Have, Scott.
Yeah, go.
I certainly have, Scott. But when Scott and I catch up over the phone, I rely on you to pass on these details of new and important products, Scott. So why am I only hearing about it now? But yeah, look, if that product, I think technology is definitely starting to show its face in our hobby with some of the products that are coming through. So, what we used to use 10 years ago versus what we're using now is, nothing really has changed, but the science behind it might have. The products, the DP projectors and the UVAs and, the daisy chain UV lights and the T5s. And, I'm sure soon they'll come up with an LED that's got a UV element to it. It's just crazy, some of the bits and pieces. And that's why I absolutely love getting new products and playing around with them and seeing what sort of applications I can apply them to. When I set these things up, it took me maybe 5 to 6 weeks of just, no joke, I reckon I spent 8 hours a day because I was on annual leave just researching products. What could I put in this? What's going to fit? What could I couple with this to make it work? What about this side of things? Have I thought about UVA? Have I thought about UVB? Have I thought about heat? Have I thought about substrate? Have I thought about thermal conductivity? All sorts of stuff. And that's what you need to look at. It's not as simple as putting a bulb in a 4-foot fish tank anymore. You've got the technology there to use it.
All right. We better start wrapping this up. Before we do wrap the interview up, any projects in particular that you're working on that you want to give a bit of a plug to, or you keeping some stuff?
Look, I don't think I like. No, I'm probably really guilty. As Scott said, I'm terrible at keeping secrets, especially when they're my secrets. A lot of stuff really isn't any different to what Joe's working with. I've got some of the I think they call them single factor patternless or single factor pinstripes, which are, the crux of a project of mine where I'd like to push those into albinos. I've got a couple of different albino types here that I'd like to play with. Nothing that I'm producing is going to be anywhere near, the top end or the push of the envelope that Joe's working on. But, the project that I'm actually watching of Joe's is the patchwork project that he seems to have, happened to pop out of some of his T+ stuff. So, I'll be watching that project pretty closely because that will be my next push. But at this stage, I really just want to do the best with what I've got here.
All right. And any other projects out there on the market, not on the market, any other projects out there that you're keeping an eye
on? I think since the days of K Brothers kind of keeping black-headed pythons and, someone slapped me before I buy one. But if that albino ever pops up, I think I'm going to have to bloody buy one, the albino black-headed. But no, in all honesty, I haven't really followed many projects. I'm as I've aged, I've kind of really kept out of the loop and just done my own thing. If a new blue tongue mutation pops up, and 9 times out of 10 it'll probably pop out in Joe's or pop up in Joe's collection when he's paid mega bucks for it. But for me, I'm really content working with what I've got. I've recently, I wouldn't say recently, about 6 or 7 months ago, I bought some frill neck lizards, and for me, I don't know. I thought that was the pinnacle of dragons for me, and I had them for 6 months, and I actually passed them over. I gave them to a friend. Yeah, right. So, for me to do that, you know me, I usually try and have a couple of different projects going at once. But for me to really focus on something, you can usually tell that it's got me by the balls. So, the blue tongues, I think, is going to be my focus for some time. Oh, cool. To give you an idea, to back it up, I've actually not thinking about renewing my license this year because in Victoria we don't need a license for blue tongues. So, and that to me in my head says that I'm very much content with what I've got.
That's a big step, man. Big step. All right, I've got 2 more questions for you. 2 more questions. What's been your favourite highlight in your time in the hobby? What have you enjoyed most? What's been the best highlight of your time in the hobby, in the Australian hobby?
I don't want to seem cheesy, but you know, the best times I've ever had was expos.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Party Central.
coming up every year for Scars and Tail, and just, you know me, like I just go nuts. Like you put me in a situation where I'm, you know, in a social butterfly, and it's just I'm talking to a dozen people. I've got another person trying to drag me away to talk to me, and you know, that's my stage. So being able to go to those expos and just see a whole lot of people converge, and you know, all of us are like-minded, and we're able to talk reptile, and no one's really giving us the nudge to say, you know, you're at a barbecue, shut up. Right? That there was pretty much my highlight year after year. You know, you coming down to Vic Expo and us renting a little cabin and you know,
Me,
spending the wee hours.
me going home to a
Wee
hospital.
hours getting you.
I remember one of those trips I come
Yeah,
home for 3 days. I spent in isolation in the PA hospital.
Not my fault, man. You just
Oh,
can't keep
couldn't-
up.
Don't worry, Tim. We'll talk to Wayne. Yeah, don't stress about that. Yeah.
Yeah, no. Look, I think the expos and the social side of it has always been the highlight for me. But you know, if I have to look back, I wasn't really in this mind frame. But you know, punching out so many geckos in a year, that was a highlight for me. You know, it went from 3 or 4 geckos to, you know, a couple of hundred in a year. That was insane for me. The highlight of being able to produce those whether other keepers want to acknowledge it or not, but being able to produce those projects when they've been a little bit hard to get going before you, and they hit your hands and you're successful with it. There's no better feeling.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no better feeling. You know, the one thing I do really want to do is just discover something new and be that first person that's actually working with it, reducing it. You know, again, it probably sounds like I'm on Joe's case, but the fact that Joe's being able to be at the front of these projects and successfully reach a point where he can release them. I want a project like that. Yeah, exactly. I want a project like that because I've always got them at the second or third owner. And, you know, the projects that I've got, bar the Albino Spotted, the geckos, for example, they went through 2 hands before before it was successful with me. So I really need another project like that. So if someone's got a weird blue tongue, stuff Joe, send it to me.
Last question, brother. If you could change one thing in the Australian hobby, what would it be?
Red tape.
Yeah.
You know, it's a sad state of affairs when Queensland has access, and I know they've recently kind of been cracked down on a little bit, but it's a sad state of affairs when Queensland has a list that supersedes ours. You know, it's a sad state of affairs when New South Wales can keep anything that they can legally obtain. You know, I was lucky enough to sit down with Tim Menford a couple of months back, and he was running through the cooperation level that he's got with South Australian Parks.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where they go with a committee and they go and meet and they talk about legislative pieces and, you know, happenings. And I think that's as far as he took it, but I'm sure more conversations happen. But their proactive response to those conversations is, okay, you want to keep it? We'll make a code and you can have it. You know, I'm unfortunate. I live in a state where we get submissions once every blue moon, and those submissions, we've got to find 100 odd keepers or 100 individual animals across Australia to be able to actually even be considered to have new species on. And it kind of discourages. You know, I'm a bit of a wordsmith because of my background with work, but you know, I've always been discouraged putting those things in because, you know, you can put your heart and soul into a submission and it'd still be knocked back. Yeah, look, I really think red tape, you know, there's so many opportunities for, you know, us as keepers to be utilised for multiple different things, and it's just red tape after red tape.
Yeah, good answer, man. Real good answer.